This is Thucydides 2 core text in English, chapter 48. It first began, as it is said, from the part of Ethiopia which is above Egypt. And then it also came down into Egypt and Libya and most of the territory of the Persian king. It attacked the city of Athens suddenly, and, at first, laid hold of the people in the Piraeus, so that it was even said by them that the Peloponnesians had thrown poison into the reservoirs, for there were not yet wells there. But it later arrived at the upper city as well, and by then many more were dying. So let each man speak about this, as he understands, whether doctor or layman, from where it probably arose, and the causes of so great a disturbance, which he thinks to be sufficient to have the power to make a change. I for my part will give an account of what it was like, from which an observer, if it should ever happen again, might best be able to have some foreknowledge and not be ignorant. This is what I will show, having had the sickness myself, and myself having seen others afflicted with it. Chapter 49. For that year it was agreed did indeed happen of all years to be the most free of sickness with regard to other diseases, and if any one did fall ill at all, in every case it developed into this. But in most cases it arose from no ostensible cause, but suddenly people in good health were seized first by violent heats in the head, and redness and inflammation of the eyes, and the inward parts, both the throat and the tongue, immediately became bloody, and emitted an unnatural and fetid breath. Then these symptoms were followed by sneezing and hoarseness, and in a short time the pain came down onto the chest with a violent cough, and when it fixed onto the heart it upset it, and discharges of every kind of bile which have been named by doctors were emitted, and these took place with great suffering. In most cases there were attacks of empty retching, producing violent spasms, which in some cases ceased shortly after this, but in other cases much later on, and to the touch from the outside the body was not excessively hot or pale, but rather red, livid, and breaking out into small pustules and ulcers. But on the inside it burned so much that the patient could not bear to have on him even the lightest clothing or linen, nor to be anything other than naked, and what they would have liked best would have been to throw themselves into cold water. Indeed, many of those who were not being cared for did this, throwing themselves into the reservoirs, gripped by unquenchable thirst, and it made no difference to them the more or the less they drank. And the intolerable state of not being able to rest or sleep was the worst affliction of all, and the body, for all the time the disease was at its peak, did not waste away, but withstood the sickness, contrary to expectation, so that most died on the 7th or 8th day from the internal burning, while still having some physical strength. But if they passed this stage, as the disease went further down into the bowels, and there, inducing a violent ulceration accompanied by violent diarrhea, most died later through weakness because of that. For the disease passed through the whole body, starting from the top, first having settled in the head, and even if someone survived its greatest impact, the taking of the extremities left its mark on them, for it attacked the private parts and the extremities of the hands and feet, and many escaped the disease with the loss of these, and there are those who also lost their eyes. Others were overcome by total amnesia as soon as they recovered from all symptoms, and they did not know either themselves or their friends. Chapter 50. For the nature of the disease being beyond reckoning, in other respects too its assault on each who had it was harsher than human nature could bear, but in the following way in particular it showed most of all that it was something different from all ordinary disorders. For birds and animals who prey upon humans, as many were unburied, either did not come near them, or died after tasting them. There is proof of this. There was an observable disappearance of birds of this kind, and They were not seen around any body in this condition, nor anywhere else. But the dogs provided greater opportunity of seeing the outcome. Why? Because of cohabitation. Such, then, was the disease with regard to its overall appearance, leaving aside many other aspects of peculiarity, as it befell each victim arising differently in one case compared with another. And at that time none of the usual diseases troubled people besides this, and whatever did arise developed into this. Some died from neglect, others died even though they were cared for very well. No one treatment was established, so to say that it should help those who used it. For what was helpful to one patient was harmful to another. No constitution showed itself to be strong enough against it regarding either strength or weakness, but all were destroyed by it, even those cared for with every regime. The worst aspect of the disease of all was the hopelessness when someone realized that he had it. For in mentally resigning themselves straightway to despair, they abandoned themselves to it much more, and gave up no resistance, and that they were dying like sheep, with one having become infected through caring for another, and this caused the greatest mortality. If they were not willing, through fear, to visit each other, they died on their own, and many households were emptied through the absence of any one to take care of them. And if they did go and see people, they died, and most of all those who laid any claim to virtue, for through honor they were unsparing of themselves in paying visits to their loved ones, when, in the end, even the relatives grew weary of the groans of the dying, overcome by the scale of the disaster. Yet for the most part those who had escaped the disease, who pitied the dying, and those who were suffering the most because of their prior knowledge, and the fact that they themselves were now in a confident frame of mind, for it never attacked the same person a second time, at least not fatally, and they were thought blessed by everyone else, and they themselves in the elation of the moment had something of a vain hope with regard to the future as well, that they would never become ill from any other disease thereafter. That was chapter 51. 52. A factor which made matters much worse than they already were was the removal of people from the country to the city, and this particularly affected the incomers. There were no houses for them, and living as they did during the hot season in badly ventilated huts, they died like flies. The bodies of the dying were heaped one on top of the other, and half-dead creatures could be seen staggering about in the streets, or flocking around the fountains in their desire for water. The temples in which they took up their quarters were full of the dead bodies of people who had died inside them, for the catastrophe was so overwhelming that men, not knowing what would happen next to them, became indifferent to every rule of religion or law. All the funeral ceremonies which used to be observed were now disorganized, and they buried the dead as best as they could. Many people, lacking the necessary means of burial because of so many deaths which had already occurred in their households, adopted the most shameless methods. They would arrive first at a funeral pyre that had been made by others, put their own dead upon it, and set it alight, or, finding another pyre burning, they would throw the corpse that they were carrying on top of the other one, and go away. 53. In other respects also the plague was the first beginning of lawlessness for the city to a greater degree. For what people had concealed that they were doing for pleasure they dared to do more readily, seeing the abrupt change in fortunes both of those who were prosperous and had died suddenly, and of those who had previously had nothing, and at a stroke inherited their wealth. Thus they saw fit to spend their money quickly, and to spend it on pleasure, thinking both their bodies and their wealth to be equally ephemeral. As for making further efforts for what seems noble, no one was enthusiastic, thinking it unclear whether they would be killed before they reached it, and it was now generally agreed, literally from all quarters, that what was pleasurable and conducive to pleasure was agreed to be honorable and valuable. No fear of God or law of man had a restraining influence. As for the gods, it seemed to be the same thing whether one worshipped them or not, from seeing everybody dying in the same way. As for offences against human law, no one expected to live long enough to be brought to trial and punished. Instead, everyone felt that already a far heavier sentence had been passed on him, and was hanging over him, and that before the time for its execution arrived, it was only natural to get some pleasure out of life. 54. So then, this was the nature of the calamity which befell the Athenians, and by which they were being oppressed, with people dying within the city, and their land outside the city being laid waste. In their distress, as is natural, older people recalled in particular this utterance, declaring that it had been prophesied long ago: "A Dorian war will come, and along with it a plague." There arose argument among people that it was not plague named in the utterance, but hunger, and predictably, in the present circumstances, the view that the plague had been spoken prevailed, for people shaped their memory towards what they were experiencing. And indeed I suppose that if ever another Doric war should befall them later than this one, and it should happen that hunger arises at the same time, in all likelihood they will take that to be the prophecy. Literally, they will prophesy in that way. Next paragraph. Recollection arose also of the Spartan oracle for those who knew it, that when they asked the gods if they should go to war, he gave the response that if they waged war with all their might, there would be victory, and he said that he would assist. And so concerning the oracle they thought that what was happening was similar. After the Peloponnesians invade, the plague arose straight away, and it did not move on or into the Peloponnese in a way that is worth speaking of, but it spread over Athens most of all, and then also the most densely inhabited of other regions. This, then, is what happened with regard to the plague. 55. When the Peloponnesians had laid waste the plain, they moved on into what is called the Paralian district, as far as Laurium, where the Athenians have their silver mines. And first they laid waste that area where it looks towards the Peloponnese, and thereafter the side that is turned towards Euboea and Andros. And Pericles, who was general at that time, also held the same view concerning the Athenians not venturing out against them, as he had done in the first invasion of Attica. While they were still on the plain, before they came to the shore, Pericles prepared a naval invasion of 100 ships against the Peloponnese, and when it was ready, it set sail. And on the ships he led 4,000 Athenian hoplites and 300 cavalry on transport vessels, converted then for the first time from existing ships. The people of Chios and Lesbos joined in the expedition with 50 ships. When this Athenian fleet set sail, they left behind the Peloponnesians who were in Attica on the coast. When they came to Epidauros in the Peloponnese, they laid waste most of the land, and after launching an attack against the city, they came into hope of capturing it, though in the end they did not succeed. Putting back out to sea from Epidauros, they laid waste the land of Troezen and Halyae and Hermione. All these places are on the coast of the Peloponnese. And setting out from there they came to Prasiae, a fortified place on the coast of Laconia, and they laid waste the land and captured the settlement itself and sacked it. Having done this, they went back home. They found that the Peloponnesians were no longer in Attica, but had withdrawn. 57. All the time that the Peloponnesians were in the land of the Athenians, and the Athenians were engaged in this naval expedition, the Athenians both on the expedition and in the city kept dying of the plague, so that it was even said that the Peloponnesians, in fear of the plague, when they found out from deserters that it was in the city, and at the same time they could see funerals taking place, they left Athenian territory more quickly. In this invasion they remained there for the longest time, and they laid waste all the land. They were in Athenian territory for about 40 days. During the same summer, Hagnon, the son of Nicias, and Cleopompos, the son of Cleinias, who were fellow generals of Pericles, took the expeditionary force which Pericles himself had used, and immediately led a campaign against the Chalcidians in Thrace, and against Potidæa, which was still being besieged. On their arrival, they brought siege engines up to Potidæa and tried in every way to capture it. There came to pass for them neither the capture of the city nor anything else that one might have expected of a force of such a size. For the plague broke out there and afflicted the Athenians very badly, with disastrous effects on the army, so that even the former soldiers who had been healthy in the time before that became infected from the expeditionary force led by Hagnon. Phormio and the 1,600 troops were no longer in the area around Chalcidiæa. Because of this, Hagnon retreated with his ships back to Athens, having lost 1,500 men to the plague from a force of 4,000 hoplites in around 40 days. The troops who had been there stayed in their positions and went on with the siege of Potidæa. 59, and the final chapter before this plague speech, the funereal speech. After the second invasion of the Peloponnesians, the Athenians, as their land had been laid waste a second time, and they were oppressed by the plague and the war at the same time, began to change their thoughts. And for one thing, they held Pericles responsible, because he had persuaded them to go to war, and it was through him that these calamities had befallen them. And further to this, they started to become eager to negotiate with the Spartans, and they sent ambassadors to them, but achieved nothing. They had no idea at all what to do. Literally, they were at a loss in their thinking from all quarters, and put the blame on Pericles. He, seeing that they were suffering with regard to the current situation, and that they were doing everything which he himself expected, after summoning an assembly, since he was still general, he wanted to lift their spirits and to divert the anger of their spirits towards a gentler and less fearful state of mind. Coming before the people, he spoke as follows. Right, chapter 60. It is not to my surprise that your anger has arisen against me, because I can see the reasons, and it is for this reason that I have summoned an assembly, so that I can remind you if there is anything unreasonable in your anger at me, or in how you are yielding to misfortunes. For I think that a whole city on the right course is of much greater benefit to its private citizens than if each of the citizens are prospering by themselves, but collectively are failing. For a man who does well individually, when his country is destroyed, comes to grief none the less, while a person whose individual fortunes are bad in a state which is prospering has much better protection. And so when a city is able to bear the disasters of individuals, but each individual is unable to bear the disasters of the state, surely we must all come to her defense, and not do what you are now doing. Being struck by misfortunes at home, you are letting go of the common safety, and you are blaming me, who urged you to go to war, and you yourselves who voted for it. And indeed, in my case, that is the sort of man you are getting angry with, someone who I think to be second to none in both understanding what needs to be done and in articulating this, being a patriot and indifferent to bribes. For the man who knows but cannot clearly explain is in the same position as if he did not understand. The man who is both of these but is hostile to the city would never speak as he should. And if this quality is there too, and he is unbribable, then everything would be exchanged for this thing. So if you followed my advice to go to war thinking that I had these qualities more than others, even to a limited degree, it would not be reasonable for me now to be accused of wrongdoing. 61. Since, indeed, for those who have the choice, and are otherwise faring well, it is a great stupidity to go to war. But if it was necessary either to give in straight away and obey our neighbors, or to take risks and survive, the man fleeing the danger is more to blame than the man who stands his ground. I, for my part, am the same man, and I do not alter, but you are taking a different position, since what happened is that you took my advice when you were unharmed, but changed your mind when you run into difficulties, and it is in the weakness of your resolve that my policy appears not to be right, since the suffering already occupies every man's perception, while the manifestation of the benefit is not at hand for anybody, and as a great and sudden reverse has befallen you, your spirits to persevere in what you resolved are low. For what happens which is sudden, unexpected, and most contrary to calculation enslaves the mind, which is what has happened to us in other regards, and most of all with regard to the plague. But none the less, as you are citizens of a great state, and brought up as you have been in habits equal to your birth, you should be willing to withstand even the greatest disasters, and not hide your worth. For people give the same judgment when a good reputation has been established, to blame whoever through weakness leaves this behind, as when it is not there to resent the man who strives through arrogance. Put aside your pain for your private affairs, and occupy yourselves instead with the safety of the commonwealth. 62. And as for the hardship with regard to the war, and the fear that it may be great, and that we will not survive any more at all, let those things be enough for you. Those things in which I have explained on many other occasions that you are not right to be suspicious of it. I will also show this to you, which you seem to me neither to have either thought about yourselves as being a part of our situation, literally available to us, concerning the scale of the empire, nor have I ever mentioned in my previous speeches, and I would not now have used what has a rather boastful meaning, had I not yet seen that you were excessively downcast. For you think that you only rule your allies, but I will reveal that of two parts which are apparent for use, land and sea, you are absolute masters of all of one of them, both as far as you use it now, and if you want to use it to a greater degree, and there is no one who will stop you when you sail with your current naval strength, neither the Persian king nor any other nation of those at the present time. So this power appears not on a par with the use of your homes and your land, which you think are great things to be deprived of. It is not reasonable to take the loss of them badly, rather than to hold them in low regard, thinking them an appendage and an ornament of wealth with regard to that, and to know that if we preserve our liberty, taking that for ourselves instead, we will easily recover these. But if we obey others, we are likely to lose even what we obtained previously, and to appear inferior to our fathers on both counts, who held these things with hardship, not having received them from others, and furthermore preserved them and handed them to you. For it is more shameful to have them and be deprived of them than to be unsuccessful in getting them. And you must confront your enemies not only with confidence but with disdain. For confidence arises even from prosperous ignorance and even in a coward, while disdain arises for whoever in his mind trusts that he surpasses his rivals, which is the case for us. And the union from the same sort of fortune arising from the confidence makes the daring more secure, and trusts less in hope, which is the strength of the desperate, but in judgment of existing resources, of which the foreknowledge is more secure. Then it is right and proper for you to support the imperial dignity of Athens. This is something in which you all take pride, and you cannot continue to enjoy the privileges unless you also shoulder the burdens of empire. And do not imagine that what we are fighting for is simply the question of freedom or slavery. There is also involved the loss of our empire and the dangers arising from the hatred which we have incurred in administering it. Nor is it any longer possible for you to give up this empire, though there may have been some people who in a mood of sudden panic and in a spirit of political apathy actually think this would be a fine and noble thing to do. Your empire is now like a tyranny. It may have been wrong to take it, it is certainly dangerous to let it go. And the kind of people who talk of doing so and persuade others to adopt their point of view would very soon bring a state to ruin, and would still do so even if they lived by themselves in isolation. For those who are politically apathetic can only survive if they are supported by people who are capable of taking action. They are quite valueless in a city which controls an empire, though they would be safe slaves in a city that was controlled by others. Chapter 64. Do not be led astray by citizens of that kind, and do not be angry with me, with whom you yourselves agreed in the decision to go to war, even though the enemy have attacked and have done what they could have been expected to do when you refused to submit, and though in addition to what we were prepared for we have been struck by the plague, the only one of all our afflictions which goes beyond what could have been foreseen. I know that the plague has increased my unpopularity to a considerable extent, but that is not fair, unless when you enjoy some unpredictable success you are prepared to give me the credit for that too. We must bear blows from heaven with resignation, and blows from the enemy with courage. This has been characteristic of our city in the past and must not be undermined by your action now. You must recognize that Athens has the greatest renown among all men because she does not give in to disasters, but has sacrificed the largest number of lives and has undertaken the heaviest burdens in war, and has built up the greatest power of any city up to the present time, and forever in the future. Even if, in our present condition, we do at some times give a little way, for it is part of the nature of all things to decline, all posterity will be able to recall that we ruled over a larger number of Greeks than any other Greeks have ruled, that we held out against the Greeks, separately and all together, in the greatest wars, that we lived in a city that was the greatest and provided and best provided in all respects. And indeed the impractical, literally politically apathetic, man might criticize this. But the man who wants to get something done himself will emulate us, and if he does not obtain what we have, he will be jealous of us. To be hated and unpopular in the present is indeed the lot of everybody who has seen fit to rule over others. But whoever takes this burden of envy in pursuit of greatness is planning rightly. For hatred does not last long, but brilliance in the present and reputation for the future are laid down to be remembered forever. So, casting your minds forwards to success in the future and avoiding disgrace for the time being, obtain both of these things with your current eagerness, and do not send envoys to the Spartans, and do not give the impression that you are weighed down by your present troubles, because those who are pained the least in their minds with regards to calamities in fact hold out the best, and these are the strongest, both of cities and of individuals.